Hi, everyone. I'd like to welcome you for joining me with Moving from New York to Connecticut, What You Need to Know. I hope to get through the next 30 minutes or so, enough information to help you know what to expect if you're trying to make the move from a bigger city into a completely different state. I'm going to start off with an introduction about myself so you can get to understand a little bit about me and why I love Connecticut and how I can help you find a place here as well. Then we're going to go into some of the features about Connecticut. There are definitely some misconceptions and hopefully I can dispel some of them. I'm going to give you a kind of lay of the land so you can understand where in Connecticut you might want to live. And then I'm going to talk to you about what you need to do to start preparing to house hunt. We're going to go through what the buying process is and how long it takes. And then I'm going to give you some extra tips about buying in Connecticut versus other states. And then I'm going to open it up to some questions. So a little bit about me. So I actually moved to Connecticut when I was 12, and I used to live in Staten Island, and I also lived in Brooklyn. So I do understand, even when I was a kid, what it was like to have such a different geographical change. I mean, I didn't even really know where Connecticut was and how my life was going to be so different. We came from a development with easily 200 kids on the street where we played on the street to 2-acre zoning where we were the only kids on the road. That's one part of Connecticut, but you definitely can find some city areas, but that was not where we were living. I thought I would do a Zoom session for anyone who was thinking about doing this and kind of wanted to just get some information. These Zoom sessions have been really great to be able to share some information with you and not have to converge in a room or have to travel long distances. I try to keep these low key, so if you have any questions, just pop your questions into the chat field and I will do my best to answer them as I'm going through the presentation. If I miss any, I do have your email addresses and I'm happy to send the responses that way, or we can connect offline. Okay. So why Connecticut? Many people think of Connecticut just as countryside, but quite honestly, it's a lot more than just red barns and covered bridges. There's definitely city life in Connecticut. You can look at Hartford, New Haven, Waterbury, New London, Stamford. It may not be a big city like New York, but certainly there is city life. And then we also have coastal life, which would be completely different than what you'll find inland. We also have an excellent college system in the state. UConn has many branches throughout. So if you don't want to go up to the Storrs campus, which is kind of in the middle of the state, you do have the flexibility to go to their satellite campuses. But there are also a number of other state schools, private colleges, religious schools, you name it, we have it. Of course, UConn is known for their incredible basketball teams, although we don't have any professional teams in the state. Foxwoods and Mohegan Sun are the casinos in the New London area, but it goes beyond the casino. You can see a concert, you can see comedians, they have fantastic restaurants. It's a great night away. The spa is beautiful. It's close to Mystic Village, which is just amazing to go to Mystic. There's an aquarium there and lots of coastal boating things, all within an hour and a half, pretty much anywhere in the state. We're also known for antiquing and wineries. We've gotten a huge influx of microbreweries later. Can't really go to any town without finding one. And then we are rich with culture and history. You can see famous homes, people who were famous that have died, people who are famous that are living, live in Connecticut. There's tours, there's museums. Yale is here. There's just plenty of things to do in Connecticut. It's not really a place where you would come and vacation for a week, but you certainly can do wonderful day trips and live here and still find that you have things that you want to do. Let's take a look at the map of Connecticut. So Connecticut's small. I mean, you can get from one side to the other in 2.5 to 3 hours maximum, and that's with traffic. You're looking at more like 90 minutes to 2 hours for most things. Hartford is kind of in the center of the state, and that's our capital. But there's many different components. If you look at Western Connecticut, it's going to be more rolling hills, countryside. You'll see on the coast where it says the Long Island Sound is definitely a coastal place. You can take a ferry from Bridgeport right over here, over to Long Island, Port Jeff, which is just really a cool one-day trip. You can head on over to Rhode Island or Massachusetts within a couple of hours. There are 8 counties, and Fairfield, Hartford, and New Haven counties make up 75% of the population of Connecticut. So if you're looking to stay up here in the Litchfield Hills, obviously it's going to be much more rural than if you're in Hartford or New Haven down here or anywhere in Fairfield County. I live in Newtown, which is about over here. It's in the northwest area of Fairfield County, and yes, it is definitely countryside. We have horses and lakes and vineyards and antiques and all those good things. It's beautiful, but I can be in the city within 90 minutes. I can be in Boston within 2 hours. It's definitely a very accessible part of the state. The state of Connecticut has cities and towns, and there are differences. Some of the way the political infrastructure works is different, and the way it's taxed, you'll hear, like I live in the town of Newtown, but it's the city of New Haven. So those are some things that you want to look at when you're trying to decide where you want to live. We talked about coastal and inland. The infrastructure. I have many clients that have come from the Bronx and Queens and come to Connecticut, and they're questioning things like, is there a bus? Is there a train? So we have the railroad, and that takes you into Grand Central in the city. Many cities have a bus system. There's cabs. You're not going to find too much in the way, well, there's no subway. You're not going to find too much in the way of railroad. There are local railroads. You're not going to go just from Stamford or New Haven to New York, but you will be able to hit some of the towns. It doesn't run like New York. It is definitely more of a car-driven state. It will make your life easier if you have at least one car. If you are in a situation where a multi-car family is not in the cards, you may want to stay more in the city, because then you will have more accessibility to public transportation. As far as interstate access, so along the coast, you have the I-95, and that can take you all the way down to Florida if you drove it. But you also have 84, 91, 395. Those are the major interstates. They're going to take you, if you took those, you can hit Massachusetts. You can hit Upper Westchester County in New York. You can hit Rhode Island. You can go down to New York. There are major highways, but there are also lots of back roads. If you're looking to still commute into New York, whether it's the city or the outskirts, Westchester, you don't think that you have to sit in traffic endlessly, because there are ways around it, depending on where you live. I know my husband works in the Stamford area here, and he has been commuting there from Newtown for over 20 years, and he takes all back roads. So it's a consistent commute. Certainly in bad weather, he may alter his direction a little bit. With COVID, since the roads were just not as full as they normally were, he was taking the highway. But you have a lot of different options. You still could take a train. You still could carpool. So if you have to live in New York, but you want to, if you have to work in New York, but you want to live in Connecticut, you have options on how you can get around. Okay, let's talk about how to prepare to house hunt, because things definitely could be a little different than what you might find in New York. So the first thing you want to know is how much house can you afford? There's a difference between what you want to pay and what you can afford. So finding out how much you can afford, you need to get pre-approved. If you're at the very early stages of your house hunting program, then what you may want to do is get pre-qualified. The difference between a pre-approval and a pre-qualified is how much depth the lender goes into making sure that you can afford the house. So if you get pre-approved, your credit will be pulled, and they're going to take a more in-depth look at the income and assets and liabilities that you provide to them. A prequal is just a calculation on a calculator, truly. There's nothing that's being verified. They're kind of giving you a range. So if they'll ask you what your liabilities are. Do you have any loans that are outstanding, about what your credit score might be, your income, and what other financial obligations you might have. They can plug in a few numbers and say, if this was all true and we didn't find anything else to be a problem, this is about where you can afford. To get pre-approved, you're going to actually get a letter that says this lender has pre-approved you under these conditions. That means they pulled your credit, they've looked at your assets, liabilities, and your financial obligations, and they are very confident that as long as you stayed within the parameters of the numbers that they've given you, you'll get your mortgage. That's not the case with the pre-qualification. If you're looking at getting a pre-approval, they are going to pull your credit, and it does knock it down a little bit, but you can have your credit pulled unlimited amount of times for 30 days and it's not going to hurt it. So you have to decide where you are in the house hunting process. If you're early on and you're still working on fixing credit, it's probably best to just get a pre-qualification so you can have some idea of what kind of house you can afford. But if you're ready to buy, you need to get a pre-approval because we're going to need that information to submit your offer. I also highly recommend shopping lenders. You may have your banker that you've been working with, or your friend's cousin's uncle is a mortgage rep. That's great. I encourage you to talk to them, but you might want to try a couple of places, 2, 3, because they're going to have access to different pieces of information, and in the way in which they present it to you. You might have a connection with somebody else. Their communication style might be better. Their rates might be different. The programs that they offer, their fees, there could be a number of factors that can change how much house you can afford. So I highly recommend shopping lenders. I also have a number of recommendations that I can make if you're not sure where to start. Do some research. Know the rates, know the terms, the language that mortgage lenders use. Not all of them assume that you're not in the mortgage industry, and so they start talking on this level where you're confused. You don't even know what they're trying to explain to you. So understand some of the terms that they might be using and ask them, what are the upfront costs? It will vary from lender to lender, and that's going to affect what you need to bring to the table on the day of closing. Like, for example, a 30-year fixed conforming as of Friday was at 2.875% to 3.125% with 0 points. There are some people that don't know what that means, and that's understandable if you've never had to buy a house before. Basically what this means is that if the house you're going to buy is less than $510,000 and you're going to go for a 30-year fixed rate, that means you're going to get an interest rate that stays the same for all 30 years. If you don't put down any money towards the bank, which means 0 points, your range of interest rate will be somewhere between 2.875 and 3.125. Now, this is very vague. Could be if only your credit score is super high, or if you have other components that will qualify you for this. But this is the kind of stuff they're going to be telling you, and you need to understand what that means. So I highly recommend just do a Google search, mortgage terms, or what it's like to get a mortgage. It will be very enlightening and help prepare you for that conversation when you meet with the lenders. Step number 2, you need to put your team together. Buying a house is not just going out there, going to a couple of open houses and getting a mortgage. You definitely, like I said, you want to have a lender in place. You're going to need that to put in an offer. You're going to need a lawyer. Connecticut is a lawyer state. You are not allowed to just use a title company to close. So you have to have an attorney, a licensed attorney in the state of Connecticut to close. So if you're working with a lawyer that's only licensed in New York, you're going to need somebody in Connecticut. Again, I can help you with that. And I highly recommend getting in touch with your attorney early on, because that's a relationship. This person is going to be representing you on a legal matter, and you want to make sure that they have your back and that they think like you think. This is also a lot of different costs and things that they include. You want to make sure that you have the lawyer that's best for you. Insurance. You're going to need to pay 1-year insurance before you close on the house. So you'll need an insurance rep. And just like everything else, insurance prices change. So you want to be able to have time to talk to a number of lenders, a number of insurance reps to make sure that you're getting the right coverage for the house that you intend to buy. And of course, you need a real estate agent. That's me. So I can absolutely help you with that. I've helped other people from Yonkers and New Rochelle and the Bronx and Queens rent and buy houses in Connecticut. And I understand what it is to make that kind of adjustment. And I think I could be very helpful to you. I have a lot of resources that will make the whole transition easier for you. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the buying process itself. So, all things being equal, the buying process takes somewhere between 30 and 90 days. Now, can it happen sooner than 30? Absolutely. Can it take longer than 90? Absolutely. The low side of 30 is usually for people who are going to do a cash buy. When you don't have to get a lender involved, things move a whole lot quicker. There's still things that need to be done. Inspections need to be done. A title search needs to be done, and that's with the attorney. So you can't just go in and say, I like this house, I want to buy it today, and then tomorrow you close. So because of those factors, 30 days is typical for a cash deal. I've seen 2 weeks, but it's not much sooner than that. All other deals, it's going to take a little bit longer. There are more players in the game, and each one requires a certain set of tasks that take time, and they're not always in your control. So you're reliant on other people to keep the ball rolling, and which is why it could take 90 days or more. So day 0 is when you're looking for a house. Now, many people start with Zillow or Realtor.com, and they go to open houses, and that's all fine. But when you're ready to start really looking, I highly recommend engaging with a real estate agent, not just because I'm an agent, but because they're going to provide you with guidance that you don't have. It's more than just unlocking doors. First of all, they're going to be able to ask the right questions about the kind of house that you're looking at. They'll be able to see this. Times I'll look through a house and I'll see this cracking on the ceiling, and my clients are not noticing these things because they're enamored with the new kitchen that was just put in. An agent will also be able to schedule a whole bunch of houses in one shot so that you can take a day and just go through and see all the homes, and they'll ask you questions. I do anyway. I ask questions about, can you see yourself living here? If this house went on deposit tomorrow, would it be devastating to you? Or if this house didn't have a pool, would you still like it? I try to play devil's advocate because it's very difficult in 15 minutes to look at a house and say, I want to live here for the next 20 years of my life. So finding the right house is very, very important. And some people go in and they're just like, I want to have a colonial, or I want to have 3 bedrooms, or I want a house that's 300,000. There's so many components that all of a sudden, as you're touring more houses, you realize, oh, I actually like contemporaries, or I actually didn't realize I don't want all this property, so I don't want to have to maintain it. So I highly encourage really taking the time to look at the houses and decide what is it that you want. In today's COVID time, I can assure you that people are being extremely safe. They are having people sign health questionnaires to make sure nobody's sick. There's hand sanitizers, gloves, booties, masks, just about every location. I carry it myself. When I take clients from New York, I like to keep them in my car because it's easier to talk. But for those that don't feel comfortable, we just caravan. For those that do, they sit in the back, mask, gloves, hand sanitizer, and I drive, and I'm also protected, and they don't touch anything. I open doors, I open cabinets, I make sure that they put their hands in their pockets and they don't have to worry about touching anything, but they can see the houses. So when you're looking, just really try and have an open mind, because there are so many components to looking at a house. You want to be sure that you're seeing what's going to make you happy for the long term. After you find the house of your dreams, you need to make an offer. So this is where having a pre-approval is important. For me, I cannot submit an offer to you on your behalf without that. You need a document that states the terms of your offer, how much you want to buy the house for, when do you want to close, are there any contingencies, meaning, are there things that you want the seller to do for you as part of this deal? Do you want them to pay your closing costs? In Connecticut, they can pay up to 3% of your closing costs. Are there personal items that you like the refrigerator or a patio set that they have? Are there other terms, like maybe you need to close, but you want them to rent the house for a month because you can't move until a certain time, but you need to close during a certain date? There's a lot of components that go into the offer. So we want to package that, and we want to tell the person a little bit about you. You know, is it a family that's coming in to have multi-generational members live together, so they need a house with an in-law, and this is the perfect spot to help grandma stay with the family and not have to go up and down steps? You know, is it that a job got transferred and this new house is everything that they always dreamed of? We try to help the sellers understand that the new people who are going to be living in their house are going to love it as much as they do. Sometimes it gives a little bit of edge. When we submit the offer, we have the actual offer kit. We have the pre-approval. You want to make sure that when you're speaking with your lender, you have the flexibility to change the pre-approval letter, even if they're the ones that do it, because you may get approved, let's say, for a $400,000 house, but you're going to put an offer on a house for $330,000. You don't want to show that you're approved for $400,000. You want to show that you're approved for $330,000. They don't need to know that you have more flexibility in the amount. So we need to be able to change that number should you have to submit an offer on more than one occasion. Sometimes offers are not accepted. Sometimes there's multiple bid and you're not the winner. So you do need to have that flexibility. You have to put down 1% of your asking price. That check gets held in escrow until closing. And you have to sign a bunch of disclosures. So what happens is that if a house is not bank owned, the seller has to submit what are called property disclosures that say multiple things about the house. How old's the roof? What kind of fuel system does it have? Has there been any leaks? Are there any underground oil tanks? Is there anything wrong with this house that you should know before you decide to purchase this? They fill this out, they sign it. As part of your offer, you need to read it and sign it. So that's another component that's put in there. If the house is older than 1978, there's also going to be a lead disclosure, because prior to 1978, many builders used lead paint. So you need to sign that to make sure that there's no known lead paint or there's not been an issue. That whole kit gets submitted and then it gets negotiated. You have some sellers that'll come back right away and counter or accept, and then you have others that drag it on. The nicer the house and the better price it is in the nicest areas are going to resist negotiating too soon, because there's the opportunity for others to submit a bid and they want to obviously get the highest amount. So you may not hear from them as quickly. If you saw a house on Friday and put in an offer, but they have an open house on Sunday and that's showing scheduled on Saturday, they may want to wait. So it could take several days. But then you have sellers that are like, come on, let's move this along. And they counter, and then you counter, and within hours, you can have an accepted offer. So that's why I put Ds 1 through 5. Then, after the offer's been accepted, you need to have an inspection. Now, I have investor clients that they don't inspect because they don't care. They're going to flip this house, so they're going to fix a bunch of things anyway. But if you're not doing this for investment purposes and you're going to live in that house, you need to inspect it. That means a building inspection, and that's going to include all the mechanicals, appliances, the roof, the structure of the house, foundation. A pest inspection, that's usually looking for termites. Water, radon gas is toxic, so it could be found in the water or in the air, so that's something you want to test for. In Connecticut, we have septic systems, so you want to test your septic. These are, except for septic, these are general inspections. If during your inspection, the inspector comes out and he's like, there's moisture in the attic and there's some black stuff that looks like mold, I think you should get it tested. Then you have to bring in a mold inspector. So it's possible that your inspections, although they're scheduled for one day, depending on the findings, you might have to come in and do a little bit more work, because you want to make sure. It's going to cost you somewhere in the $700 to $1,000, depending on how many components you're inspecting. But it's better to spend that and find out, oh my gosh, this house has so many things wrong with it. It's going to cost us so much more to fix it. than to not do all the inspections and then get hit with these bills later. From day 16 to 20, once the inspection reports come back, you have an opportunity to renegotiate with the seller. Not all the time does this happen. There's always going to be something that happens in the inspection. You're not getting a brand new house, but there's going to be a difference of what little things can you manage on your own, or what are some more serious things that you want the seller to handle. Sometimes buyers will say, I found these things. There were 10 things. I want you to address these 3 things, and I want you to fix it before closing. And what they'll do is they'll show you a receipt from the licensed contractor that fixed it. Other buyers say, nah, I don't trust that. I would rather have my guys fix it so I know it's done to the way I want. So I want a credit at closing because now I have to pay somebody to do that. That also works. What you'll then have to do is get a few quotes so that you're not picking a number out of the air. You're picking a number that's going to actually cost you to make the repair. So at this stage, the deal is not solid. If the seller says, you know what, you're asking for too many things, I'm out, because you've now come back to renegotiate, your original deal is null and void. So you are putting yourself in a situation to like basically start the negotiations again. Many times, if there's a meeting of the minds, everybody gives a little and we move forward. But there are some times where there's just too many things or too expensive things that the buyer is like, you know what, I'm out. Or the seller's like, you know what, if I have to put all those things in there, I may as well do it and then keep the house. So you have to expect that this is going to go back and forth. If everybody's reasonable, then you can come to a meeting of the minds and give in on both sides so that it makes sense going forward for both parties. Once that section is done and everybody's decided that they want to continue with the deal, that's when you apply for your mortgage. You don't want to apply if you find out that the inspections failed and you weren't able to renegotiate. So at this point, you're going to apply for your mortgage. And if you had done everything that you were supposed to do in the beginning, this is not so bad. You would have submitted already most of what the lender is going to need. They are going to need to hire an appraiser that comes to the house and evaluates the value. The reason why they do this is you may have negotiated this great deal in your mind, but what you didn't realize is that if you do an evaluation of all the houses that have the same specs, that you're actually paying too much and it doesn't appraise. In cases like that, it's up to the seller to reduce the price to the appraisal amount. They could opt to not do it, and at that point, you don't have a deal. One of the things that I do to try to alleviate this from being an issue is when you are ready to make your offer on the house, I do a quick analysis to see, is the seller crazy and are they asking too much for this house? Or is this in line with what houses of this type would cost? So that you're trying to get that information up front. We don't want to have to deal with a failed appraisal later because it's just a hassle and you risk losing the house if the seller doesn't want to come down in price. You could pay the difference, but it's just not advantageous for the buyer to do that. A mortgage could take quite a bit of time. Now with COVID, appraisals are taking a lot longer. Town halls are closed or have limited hours, so they can't get in there to do the research they have to do. Sellers don't want the appraisers inside their house, so they have to either do a drive-by or kind of work with the seller to do like a FaceTime thing to see the inside of the house. We want to make sure that we're getting all the information possible so that the appraisal comes out correct, but understanding that there's unique circumstances right now, and to keep everybody safe, we just have to be a little bit more flexible. So what ends up happening is that you may have said, I want to close by this particular date, but because the lender is needing more time, an extension is filed by your attorney, and the dates for closing just get extended a little bit. And then, of course, is your closing day. One of the things you want to ask your lender is upfront, besides the deposit that you have to put down, what are all your closing costs going to be? And since you're doing that early on, you'll know, so that when you put in your offer, you'll know if you want to make any seller concessions and have them pay part of your closing costs. It's not something that every seller will want to do. It reduces the price. So if they have the house on the market for $300 and you negotiated a price of $290 plus closing costs, they're not really selling it for $290. They're selling it for $290 less your closing cost fee. So that really does reduce what they get, and they may not be willing to do that. There's other circumstances where you could say, I'm going to ask you full price, but then I'm going to put on top of that an additional amount so that that whole thing, that whole total amount can be rolled into the mortgage, and you're basically paying your closing costs through your mortgage. And that doesn't reduce the sale price for the seller at all. They're always willing to do that. So it's just some options, and you should speak to your lender about that. So a few other things to know. I spoke before about an inspection, about the inspections. So in Connecticut, many places in New York, I don't know unless you start hitting Westchester County, they have public water. You know, you pay a water bill and the city serves your water. In Connecticut, that's not the case, not for every place. There are some areas with public water, and the more city-like you get, the more likelihood you'll get public water. But most of the more rural countryside houses are going to have well water, and it's just a big well in your house, in your property, with a pump, and you don't pay for water service. But if your power goes out, you lose water. So it is something, it's not really much you could do. If there's no city water in your area, there's nothing for you to hook up to. Well water is perfectly fine. Sometimes it might be a little harder, so some people put a water softener, or if it has not the proper chemical distribution, you can filter your water. But I've had all well water my whole time living in Connecticut, and I've never had a problem. The other thing is a septic versus a sewer. So again, sewer is public. You flush your toilet, you take a shower, you wash your clothes, water goes down a drain, you pay a bill, you're done. You don't have to think about it. That's not the case with septic. A septic is like a private sewage system on your property. It has tanks and pipes and fields and all these components to it. They last a long time, but if you're buying a house that's like in the 1950s and they have the original septic, you're going to have to replace the septic system, and that could be a pricey endeavor. 30, 40 grand. It could be less if there's some components you can use, or if they don't have interference and there's another place on the property that they can move it. But it is something to understand. There's no fee. You do have to pump it every couple of years. And if you decide to do a renovation to your house and increase the size of it, you have to make sure that your septic is large enough to accommodate the number of bedrooms of your home. A lot of New Yorkers are scared to death when they hear septic. There is nothing to be afraid of. It is a very normal thing and is very manageable. You get used to it once you start living there. But it's in the buying process. You just want to make sure, how old is the septic? Is it the original septic? And that's why you do a septic inspection. They throw a camera down there. They can see if there's any cracks in the tank, if there's rust, if it's clogged, if it's, anything that could be a problem with it. So you'll know in advance if there's an issue. And then you can make your decision accordingly. Also, we have homes that are fueled in a number of different ways. If it says gas, you have to see, is it natural gas, which is pulled in by the city, or is it propane, where you have tanks on your property and you get it filled on an account that you have privately with a company. And then there's oil, and then we have solar, and we have electric. So these are the different things. I know a lot of New Yorkers come in and they just want gas because it's what they know, but it doesn't mean that oil is going to be harder to manage. It's different, and you just have to know what's the equipment like, and what are the accounts. You need to have an account with an oil company who delivers your oil, so you don't run out. And I do it as a budget plan, so every month I pay the same amount, and they know when to come. I've never run out of oil, and it's fine. I wish I had gas just so I can have a gas stove, but I can always put that in with propane, and a lot of people do that if they find that there's no natural gas in the area. So it's just something else to look at. And I know many New Yorkers come to Connecticut because they want some tax relief. As somebody who lives in Connecticut, we chuckle because we think our taxes are high. And they are, but just everything's relative. So we have what's called a mill rate, and every town has a mill rate, and the value of the house. So they take the appraised value of the house, They take 70% of it and multiply it by the mill rate, and that's how they come up with your property taxes. So you might have a house that's not appraised very high in one town, but their mill rate is really high, so your taxes are high. And then others where the mill rate is very tiny, but because the value of the houses is so big, the taxes are even higher. So you just want to look at that and understand that's how your taxes are determined. And that same mill rate is used to also assess property tax for your car. Not every state has that, but Connecticut does. So you are paying taxes on your car as well as your home. That's my presentation. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at this time. And you can always reach me at my cell number. I'm glued to my phone. There's my email address as well. And I'd be happy to show you around Connecticut and help you understand why this is a great place to live. Thank you so much for joining my presentation, and I look forward to meeting you in person.